It is Thursday, September 29th here at Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to the Week 4 Preview Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. Jared, we got a Miami at Cincinnati game tonight on Thursday. Bengals are favored by 3.5, over under 47.5. And early in the week, we're only on Thursday right now, but early in the week, Tua looked like there's a solid chance he might not play in this game. He's questionable officially. They're saying he's trending toward playing. He's got ankle and back issues. I mean, there are implications for him, not just as an individual player, but for the offense overall. How are you feeling about Tua Tagovailoa as a fantasy prospect tonight and the Dolphins wide receivers as an extension of that?
Yeah, I'm going to say this like with almost every quarterback this week, but I'd like to rank Tua lower than where we have him. But like there are question marks and issues with almost like every quarterback this week, besides Josh Allen, like almost literally they either, we don't like them in general or they're in, tougher matchups with Tua. It's definitely, these injuries are a concern. I think, there's a chance he's not able to make it through the game. We'll see how it impacts his effectiveness. He was talking about the back thing, limiting his ability to turn through throws and stuff. So that's an issue for the wide receivers. I think people would argue if they have to turn to Teddy Bridgewater, how big of a downgrade is that from Tua? So I'm not super worried about Tyreek and Jalen Waddle. I'm still starting. Then Waddle's on the injury report with a groin. He's questionable, but he's expected to play too. I haven't seen anything to suggest that's serious. So I'm definitely sticking with those two guys. Tua, despite the fact that he's 10th or 11th in our rankings, I would not, be against benching him if you have, a similar option.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a reluctant 10th or 11th, as you alluded to. It's basically because he has Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And then you look at the guys behind him, and it's like, that guy's fine, but he doesn't have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So I guess we'll roll with this and see what happens. It's worrisome, and it's especially worrisome since it's a Thursday game. They didn't have the whole week to get over whatever is bothering them. I don't know of any evidence. I've had people ask about, because of the Thursday night curse or whatever, do I maybe not play this guy? If it's out there, I don't know about it. Maybe it is, but do we know of any evidence that Thursday guys underperform relative to what they do over the course of the season?
Yeah, I think, and don't quote me on this, but I think I've seen something that unders hit at a higher rate than usual on these Thursday night games, which that's bad news for fantasy. But it's not huge. It's they might hit at 56%, or something like that. So I don't know. The good news for these Dolphins guys, they should be fresh. They ran only 39 offensive plays in that game against the Bills. So, the defense might be tired. That might be a mark in the favor of some of these Bengals guys, but the offense should be fresh.
At least everybody except for the quarterback. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. I think that if you're trying to break a tie, and if you have somebody going Thursday night who's been dealing with an injury versus somebody who's going Sunday and is not, then go ahead and lean toward the guy that doesn't have the injury and gets longer to rest. But I wouldn't say it's Thursday night, I'm not using Jalen Waddle, I'm going to reach down and play Romeo Doubs because of the Thursday night curse.
Yeah, again, Waddle should be in fantasy lineups tonight for sure.
Left tackle Teron Armstead, also questionable, but also expected to play. No practices this week. He's got a toe injury. So, I mean, if he's out, certainly not good for the offense, but it doesn't sound like he will be. And I don't think we can really make any adjustments based on what we do know here. Chase Edmonds, not an injury situation, scored twice against Buffalo. So that always makes somebody show up more in fantasy. But Raheem Mostert still played more than he did. It's at best a split backfield.
Mostert also ran more pass routes, which you hate to see if you're an Edmonds owner. I actually bet the over on 7.5 receiving yards for Raheem Mostert tonight. I'm just seeing the usage he's getting in the passing game. So I mean, those guys, I don't like either of them in fantasy lineups tonight. They're both like low end RB3s. Those were so. The Dolphins have had 3 carries inside the 5-yard line so far this season. Alec Ingold, their fullback, got the first one in week 2. And then, numbers 2 and 3 went to Chase Edmonds last week. I'm not ready to say that, he's their designated goal line back. That's definitely a situation to keep an eye on these next few weeks as they hopefully get more, carries near the goal line.
On the other side of this one, I bet the over on the receiving yards for Joe Mixon. The playing time was down slightly versus the Jets, but not to a worrisome level. Was dealing with the ankle injury last week. Full practices on both Tuesday and Wednesday to close this short week, though. So I'm not adjusting Joe Mixon at all for the ankle factor. And his targets per game are way up versus any other year of his career. 6.7 targets per game through 3 weeks. The previous high for Mixon was 4.3 per game, and that came over just 6 games back in 2020. So we didn't even know what his number was going to be over the course of that season. And, the inflated passing volume for the team obviously helps that number, but Mixon's also seen 16% target share. That's excellent. That's up from 9.2% over all of last season. And really, that's the thing that I was hoping for, because late last season, we saw Joe Mixon's target share climb up into that 15 to 17% range. So if it's going to stay in there all year, he's got smash potential.
Yeah, that's where it should be. I mean, he's been a good receiving back since his days at Oklahoma. Yeah, Mixon, to me, maybe you try to go get him before this game tonight. To me, he's like one of the best buys at running back right now. He is vastly underachieved versus usage so far. He's getting elite high-end RB1 usage. The only reason the snaps were down last week is because he played just 2 snaps in the fourth quarter. They kind of pulled him after he tweaked his ankle, and they had the big lead against the Jets. So probably a smart move there. So, he's an obvious start. And again, if you don't have Joe Mixon, I might, go right now, try to send a trade offer, see if you can get him.
Joe Burrow hasn't been awesome so far, but I mean, the Bengals need him, so we're sticking with him. And, like you mentioned, it's a tough week at quarterback anyway, so you don't really have too many options that are more attractive.
Yeah, Miami 29th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. Setting up as a bit of a pass funnel early. They're 7th against the run, but 29th against the pass.
And then elsewhere, I mean, the Bengals are pretty straightforward. We had the numbers from Tyler Boyd, but it's kind of fluky. He had the one long touchdown that really inflated that.
Yep, but Boyd's still like an emergency only option. Hayden Hurst, so his route rate was way down last week, 51%, but he had that groin injury. Now he's off the injury report this week. He put on full practices on Tuesday and Wednesday, and Miami is dead last in our adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends metric. So, Hurst not inside our top 12, but like if you, had been using him, if you're kind of hurting a tight end, you've been turning to Hurst. I do think he's back on the radar this week because it looks like he's much healthier this week than he was last.
We're going to have to start a drinking game for you mentioning Hayden Hurst on every single show this year. Anything else from that game?
Nope.
Let's move on to Sunday, which gets an early start, 9:30 a.m. here in the East, because the Vikings are facing the Saints in London. Vikings by 2.5, over under 43.5. And the biggest injury story to watch here is Dalvin Cook. Got the shoulder injury, did not practice Wednesday. He's feeling better and better, according to the coach, heading into Thursday, but still unlikely to practice. And then the team is traveling after that to London. The Saints got there at the beginning of the week. It's interesting to see the teams differ in their travel plans, Jared, because to me, I would think at this point, there's so much data out there that the teams probably know what has been best for when to travel. And the fact that we get different travel plans, especially for 2 teams with relatively young head coaches, tells me that it's not really clear that there's a distinct advantage of getting there early in the week or getting there later in the week.
Yeah, I would love to see that data if it's out there, and it could help us with some of these sit questions when we know one team went early and one didn't. I mean, Dalvin Cook, he's dealt with shoulder injuries throughout his football career. You remember last year, he was in the same situation in that it was a Thursday night game against the Steelers where, he was a game time decision. We weren't sure if he was going to play. We weren't sure how much he would play. And then he ends up active and has a massive game. Now, all that came on the ground. He only had 1 target on 3 catches. So that's kind of the question. Can he catch the football with a shoulder harness? So Cook right now, we'll keep an eye on the situation and all that, but he's lower than usual in our week 4 rankings, just because I think the passing game role could be down, and there's, I'd say pretty significant risk that he doesn't make it through the game, right? If he takes a hit on that shoulder, that might be it for him. So he's lower than usual, but he's still on a spot. I think he's like 13th in our running back rankings. Like, you'd have to be pretty stacked at the position to bench Dalvin Cook, assuming he ends up active.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot to remind folks that we really don't know a whole lot more than you do about how likely a guy is to get less work in a game. Unless there's a specific report of a coach saying we're going to limit his work because he's dealing with this. Otherwise, we're all absolutely guessing. Yeah. So, you have to take the risk into account, consider your other options, and then, just ultimately make a personal call. Like, the Dalvin Cook game from last year is a good example. Like, all of us were like, I don't know, he's definitely not full strength. And then he goes out there and runs 200 yards. Like, well, I mean, that's why you just sometimes you just go with your guy and see what happens.
Yeah. 27 carries in that game for Cook. So he wasn't limited there. Now it's a brand new coaching staff in Minnesota, a brand new front office even. So maybe they have a different take on how to treat Cook because he's dealing with this injury.
Yeah, and it's unlikely that most coaches are going to say before the game, yeah, we're going to cut him off at 12 carries. Not sure
Right.
exactly when those 12 come, but we want to make sure not to ding him up too much. That's just doesn't happen.
It's going to depend on the flow of the game, Matt.
Right. Hot hand approach. Justin Jefferson, it stinks to get 2 poor outings among his first 3 games of the year, and poor, of course, relative to what we expect from Justin Jefferson. Really way too early to change any opinion on him, though. And he might have faced a pair of tough corners so far. And I say might because I think that's important. We get to this point in the year and we start thinking, oh, we've got several games to judge by. It's still very early in a game whose whole season is made up of small samples. So we're not overjudging anything yet. He faced Darius Slay a lot in the Philly game, faced Jeff Okudah last week for the Lions. And we'll talk a little bit more about Okudah when we get down to the Lions game in this one. So maybe those cornerbacks were factors in Jefferson's lacking production the past 2 weeks. They might not have been. It might be that this offense is going to have bumps, and it might have just been a couple of rough games for a guy who's generally awesome. So this week he's got Marshawn Lattimore. That's a concern. I'm not adjusting Justin Jefferson based on where I would have used him heading into the season in week 4.
No, me either. I think he's too good to continue being limited like this. I think it's good news that both Adam Thielen and KJ Osborne scored last week, so taking advantage of the softer coverage they're getting because of all the defensive attention that's going Jefferson's way. So it'll start to shift a little bit. Not that defenses are going to forget about Jefferson, but if Thielen and Osborne, even Irv Smith at times, are making these defenses pay for all the attention they're spending on Jefferson, that's going to free up Jefferson going forward.
Now, I do think the way that New Orleans has operated defensively, they will probably have Marshawn Lattimore on Justin Jefferson pretty much this whole game. That's a worse thing than if it weren't the case. But if Jefferson's that good, he should be able to beat Marshawn Lattimore at times. He should be able to find open spots. They should be able to scheme him the ball. And that's the big thing is they have been scheming him the ball so far. He's got 10 more targets than anybody else on the team. And Adam Thielen, who was fine in week 2, was better last week because he scored a touchdown, is second in that category, but he's much closer to Irv Smith and KJ Osborne in work so far than he is to number 1 Justin Jefferson.
Yeah, you can consider fading Jefferson in DFS, but he's locked in your starting lineup in season-long leagues. Yeah, Thielen's outing was encouraging last week. I mean, the TD is always nice, but he got a 19.5% target share. If he can settle in that range, he can still be a useful wide receiver 3 for fantasy. I'm not convinced he will, but it was good to see him do it for at least 1 week.
Yeah, he's at 16% through 3 games, so that's well down from what we've gotten in other recent seasons from Thielen. If he stays in that range, that he's basically Allen Robinson. So, he's usable right now, but don't overrate the touchdown last week and say, okay, Adam Thielen's back.
Yes.
Irv Smith route rates 44%, 60%, 55%. So it was usable target counts the past 2 weeks, but a guy that there's no reason to be optimistic about yet.
Yeah, you're living dangerously with those type of route rates. And the Saints, I feel like they've been a good tight end defense for a while now, and that's continued this season. They shut down Kyle Pitts in week 1. They haven't really been tested the last 2 weeks, but Football Outsiders has them third in tight end coverage. So I would definitely start Hayden Hurst over Irv Smith this week. Take a drink.
Yes, I would start Hayden Hurst over Irv Smith as well. And I would need a couple drinks if I was making that decision. Michael Thomas on the other side did not practice Wednesday with a foot injury. Jameis Winston did not practice Wednesday and was also not on the field early Thursday with back and ankle issues. He told the Times-Picayune that he was preparing to play, but it sounds like they also need to get Andy Dalton ready to play, and we'll kind of see where this goes. Jarvis Landry also didn't practice Wednesday with the foot issue. Jared, do you have any updates on the receivers alongside Winston?
Yeah, the early reports were that Thomas didn't practice again on Thursday and that Landry did. I always hate putting too much into those, though, because the reporters get to see the first 15 minutes. So a lot of times the actual injury report is different from what they report early on. But the Thomas and Landry injuries were both reported as minor. It's not long-term things at least, but I don't think they're locks to play. Landry obviously looks like a better bet at this point if he did practice today. But either way, I mean, with those guys banged up, I think Chris Olave is the best fantasy play among the Saints wide receivers, at least for this week. And I mean, it's possible that he is for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's him and Thomas close right now in terms of deciding who to have on your roster the rest of the way. And then we'll kind of see how things develop with Chris Olave. A switch to Andy Dalton might be bad for Olave, worse for Olave than for the other guys than Jameis Winston, because Andy Dalton's got a career 8.6 yard average depth of target. He's been under 8 yards each of the past 2 years. Jameis Winston at 10.8 career. So he likes throwing to the area of the field that favors Chris Olave over the other two wideouts, whereas Andy Dalton's a little bit more of a short operator, at least. So, and Jameis Winston's been at 12.0 in ADOT through 3 games this year with Olave and the others on the field. So I think it's a slight downgrade. It's not one that's going to ultimately make the decision a whole lot different for me on Olave versus guys around him in the rankings.
Yeah, Olave has 33 and 32% target shares the last 2 weeks. So, like, even if he loses a few of those deep balls from Andy Dalton, like he's still going to be getting enough volume to be. I think he's a nice wide receiver 3 play this week.
And then if Jameis Winston doesn't play, I think Taysom Hill becomes a name to talk about. I've already seen one question of, do I play Taysom Hill? And of course, it's somebody saying, do I play Taysom Hill now that Jameis Winston's out? First of all, we don't know that he's out yet. We know he's not practicing. He wasn't practicing early on Thursday. We'll see if he's not playing in this game. I do think that there is a bit more upside to Taysom Hill if there's no Jameis Winston, because if New Orleans is going to its backup quarterback and does get Taysom Hill back from the rib injury that cost him last week, then, there's a little bit more incentive maybe to run more of those Taysom Hill plays in the game.
Yeah, I was going to say the rib injury adds some risk. The Saints actually do have their Thursday injury report posted. So Taysom Hill's gone limited. So I think he's trending towards playing, but I don't know if the rib will limit him in that game. Jarvis Landry was limited today. Winston did not practice. Michael Thomas did not practice either. So I think Thomas is, he's looking iffy for this game.
Yeah, for sure. So Jared, who is the highest ranked tight end that you would be willing to let somebody play Taysom Hill over?
I have to pull up our tight end rankings.
I
probably don't have to go too far.
I say it's in like 14 to 16 range. I think Hayden Hurst or David Njoku are a couple of lines.
You're saying if Winston's out?
Yeah, if Winston's out.
Yeah, I think, because then you're talking like Dawson Knox. I definitely play him over. I guess we'll see on Dalton Schultz, but Irv Smith, Logan Thomas, Daniel freaking Bellinger is our tight end 21 right now, which shows you how disgusting the position is. But yeah, to me it's somewhere in like the mid-teens range, because Hill just beats all those guys in ceiling down there.
Yeah, I think everybody from David Njoku up, I would certainly play ahead of Taysom Hill. I think when you get to Hayden Hurst, it's like you can go whichever way you want. At that point, I'm not dropping Hayden Hurst to get Taysom Hill. I'm probably not even grabbing Taysom Hill for the purpose of starting him over Hayden Hurst, especially because we have to make that decision today without knowing the ultimate status of Taysom Hill's rib injury. And it's honestly, it's probably not somebody that I'm grabbing to start. Like if I don't have any tight end that's higher than that group of guys you were just talking about already, then I'm trying to make a long-term fix for my roster at this point, not merely focusing on who to play in week 4. So, but if you do have Taysom Hill, if you have access to Taysom Hill and you don't have to drop anything of value to get him, I think that's the range where it's okay to go ahead and take a shot and see what happens.
Yeah, I think he's a great stash where he has tight end eligibility, because these, I'm not sure this back injury is going away anytime soon for Jameis Winston. Then Andy Dalton's still Andy Dalton. I think there's a chance that he kind of face plants and Taysom Hill gets some starts at quarterback this season.
And Joe Saviano on YouTube asks about Evan Ingram. I would play Evan Ingram over Taysom Hill pretty easily, and especially because if I have Evan Ingram, I don't feel the need to spend that roster spot on Taysom Hill.
Yeah, we got to stick with our boy Ingram. We'll get to him later, but I would play him over Taysom.
And then finally, Alvin Kamara is still dealing with his rib issue, but he was limited Wednesday, so that points to him being in better shape than he was last week.
Yeah, limited again today. He's going to play. I think Kamara is a good buy right now, and I like him a lot this week. Last week was the first game I think where he was healthy. The first game he was limited by the rib injury, then he didn't play week 2. But last week, 70% of the snaps, got 15 of the 20 running back carries, saw 7 targets, a 17% target share. He caught just 2 of them, hasn't scored a touchdown yet, so the fantasy production hasn't been there. But the usage has been solid. This is a good matchup. The Vikings are 31st in Football Outsiders run defense.
And Andy Dalton from Jameis Winston certainly wouldn't be bad for running back target shares.
Yes, for sure.
The Chargers at the Houston Texans. Chargers by 5.5, even though they stopped playing football last week officially. Over under 44.5. Justin Herbert was limited Wednesday, so I feel like that's a mildly positive signal for his rib injury. Keenan Allen was limited Wednesday with his hamstring injury. Last week, he went limited, no practice Friday, and then didn't play in that game. So we'll still have to watch him. Doesn't necessarily mean there's significant progress. And the offense, I mean, it's not directly involved in fantasy value, but left tackle Rashawn Slater is done for the year after tearing his biceps.
That's huge. He had already emerged as one of the better tackles in the game, and I think his replacement Storm Norton, who's been horrible every time he's been on the field. So that's a big loss. I'm so pissed I fell for the Chargers again, putting that Super Bowl bet on them. I feel like they're dead already because they lost Joey Bosa for what? Is he done for the season, or he's done for a while, right?
The last thing I saw was Brandon Staley saying the doctors said he'll be back at some point, but that sounds like we have no idea when, but he probably will be able to play before the end of the season. He's on IR, so he's out at least 4 games, but it sounds like it'll be beyond that too.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't think that's a real guy. I think that's one of those guys that back in the 80s would be waiting out in the wrestling ring for the star dude to come down to his music and then just get whooped in like 6 minutes.
I mean, the Chargers are cursed. There's no other explanation for this. Herbert was pretty bad last week. His PFF passing grade, it was the 7th lowest of his career. It was, easily the lowest of this season. So you got to think the rib injury had a lot to do with that. Again, this week, there's like no strong spot start quarterback option. So, if Herbert's your guy, I think you just got to play him. I have, read a couple of things, from, the Twitter doctors we follow that Herbert should just progressively get better each week from that rib injury. So this week should be better than last. And, obviously this matchup against Houston's a fine enough matchup.
Mm-hmm. Austin Ekeler's playing time is down versus last year, and it's not a lot, but it's a decent amount for somebody drafted in round 1. It's in line with his 2020 and 2019 playing time rates. 2020 he finished as RB26. 2019 he was RB4 in PPR points, but he was 34th in carries that season, 2nd in targets, and that seems like it might be the way that they want to use him this year.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The passing game usage has been fine. I mean, last week he runs a route on 52% of the pass plays, gets an 18% target share. Like that's where we want him. But he's definitely losing more carries to Sony Michel and Josh McCall, and especially the short yardage stuff. Just 40% of the Chargers running back carries for Ekeler last week. That's not a number he's gonna be able to pay off his ADP at if it stays. So we'll see. I mean, I feel like this Chargers offense is still like a work in progress early this season. They've just had injuries all over the place. So we'll see how it kind of pans out. But, the Rashawn Slater injury is not going to help Ekeler either.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's more annoying than anything we can act on right now because you kind of have to play Ekeler with where he went. And we just have to hope that they're giving him the ball more than they have so far and that they're still ironing out wrinkles.
Yep.
Mike Williams is just going to be an inconsistent guy. I mean, he's going to be a frustrating guy to have on rosters going forward. Yeah. And I don't think there's a whole lot you can do about that. You play him through it. You realize that you're going to take some bad weeks like last one, and then you will get good weeks on the other side. We just did a Dynasty Buy Sell Hold report that went on the site yesterday, though. And to me, Jared, I know he didn't make it into the article. I think Mike Williams is a sell because I think that the guy that he's going to be going forward is basically Michael Gallup. And I think that what people view him as is something more than that. I just don't think that he's going to be the consistently over 20% target share guy. He's going to be the guy that gives you a week where he scores, 115 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then a couple of weeks where he catches 2 balls for 36.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he's been throughout his entire career so far. He might say, I mean, that's still useful in fantasy, right? I mean, most receivers are inconsistent. To me, the reason I wouldn't sell Williams in dynasty is because he just got the 3-year contract extension. So he's tied to Justin Herbert for the next 3 seasons. Like, I think he's going to be fine, even though maybe he's not going to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy, but I think he's going to be fine. Especially as Keenan Allen continues to age and potentially decline.
15.7% target share through 3 games, and almost all of that without Keenan Allen so far. He's tied with Gerald Everett in targets, 1 target behind Josh Palmer, 2 targets behind Austin Ekeler. So, it's not somebody that I think is worthless going forward, but, you got to give value to get value. I think the perception on Mike Williams is higher than reality.
That target share is coming up. Like he's been above that even the past couple seasons. It's not going to be 16%.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that as well, but I think that the cap is more like 19% than it is 23%. And I think it sounds like nitpicking, but like that's the level where I don't think he has wide receiver 1 upside.
Yeah. We need the Chargers offense to get going. Everyone on this offense has been disappointing so far. Like if the offense is going to be, not what we expected, then all these guys are going to be underwhelming.
There are lots of questions that I've seen, like, should I drop Gerald Everett for David Njoku? Should I drop Evan Ingram for Tyler Conklin? And I never really know how to answer stuff like that because all of these guys I think are likely to be in the same range going forward, probably through the rest of the season. They're going to outscore each other. There's going to be a week like David Njoku had last week. There's going to be a stretch where the Jets are throwing a ton and Tyler Conklin is very involved. And then, it'll swing the other way. So what I usually say is these guys are honestly in the same range. So if you have a favorite, you can go for it. But I don't think there's generally a whole lot separating Gerald Everett from those other guys.
Not a whole lot, but I do like him over those other guys you mentioned and guys in that range. Everett had his first bad fantasy game of the season last week, but he actually set a season high in route rate at 72%. And he's tied to Justin Herbert. I think that's what he has over those other guys you mentioned. Everett's 8th among tight ends in expected fantasy points. So if he's getting that level of usage tied to a high end quarterback, I think I think he's going to finish the year as a top 12 tight end.
I agree with that. A defense, as you mentioned, Joey Bosa lost for this foreseeable future, so that definitely changes that matchup that looked like it could have been tough for teams before the Jaguars decimated them. I still think the Chargers defense is usable this week against Houston and maybe beyond, but we'll see how they fare in that game without Bosa.
Yeah, so J.C. Jackson's the other big injury to track here. He missed weeks 1 and 3, played week 2 with the same ankle injury, I believe, right? So he's big for the Brandon Cooks matchup here, and Brandon Cooks super frustrating so far. The volume is there. He has 29 targets through 3 games, a 27% target share, but he has 13 catches for 158 yards and no touchdowns. Just putrid efficiency for Brandon Cooks, and it's a guy that's been efficient throughout his career. He's been efficient with the Texans. He was efficient with Davis Mills last season. So I gotta believe Mills, by the way, has taken a step back, I think, which has hurt. But this Cook's efficiency stuff has to improve. So I'm sticking with him as at least like a low end wide receiver 2 going forward.
Tied for 13th in targets league wide right now among wide receivers, tied for 33rd in catches, 37th in yards, 51st in PPR scoring, tied with Robbie Anderson.
Yeah.
So that's not a fun name to see, but I agree that you lean a little bit more on the usage than the production. And I mean, obviously there's always been some risk to Brandon Cooks that there would be less efficiency. It's frustrating beyond just the specific performance for him that Houston, like it's okay to give Davis Mills a shot to see if he's the answer, but how do you not ensure that with something better than Kyle Allen?
I don't know. I mean, what's the point for them? Like they're not going anywhere this year anyway. I mean, I don't
but
know.
Like, look who was out there this year as backup quarterbacks. I mean, there are plenty of guys who you could be like, okay, we'll give Davis Mills a shot this year, but we're going to bring in Andy Dalton behind him. Like that would be a better answer than Kyle Allen if things just went south to the point where Davis Mills can't win a football game.
Yeah, sure would be nice for Cooks if he had that backup option, but you mentioned Robbie Anderson. Like Cooks is off to a start this year, like Robbie Anderson had last year, where it's just like insanely low efficiency. I think Cooks is a much better player than Anderson, so I'm more confident that he'll turn it around.
Certainly seems like a steadier individual. Dameon Pierce limited Wednesday with a hip issue. He had a nice game last week, 80 yards, touchdown, caught 2 balls for 21 more yards. Worth remembering that came on 20 carries. So it was just 4 yards per rush. It's not like he was amazing last week. And it was a close game against a Bears team that doesn't look like it's going to be very good. So we'll see what the matchup against the Chargers is like this week, especially with all the injuries on that defense that we mentioned. Pierce, I think, is a solid option for sure. I don't think he's quite to the point of being a lineup lock off of last week's game, though.
No, I don't think so either. I think he'll have success on the ground against the Chargers, and you can run against this defense. The risk is if the Texans do fall behind by a couple scores, because Rex Burkhead, Pierce kind of closed the gap in pass routes in week 2, but in week 3, it was back to Rex Burkhead dominating the passing game work. So if Houston does fall behind, I think you're going to see Pierce off the field quite a bit.
Maybe if you are betting on either Justin Herbert, Mike Williams, or somebody else in your fantasy lineup, maybe you hedge that with some Dameon Pierce in like underdog pick'ems or sleeper over unders. You can get into either of those and get a full deposit match by using promo code DraftShark. So you can jump in, put some money on the guy that might be beating your fantasy team in real life. I did our underdog pick'em article yesterday, Jared, and Dameon Pierce was in it once again because his underdog line is still under 60 yards coming off that 80-yard game.
Wow.
Was still double digits below our week 4 projection for him, which only has him at RB25. So, I mentioned it before for Dameon Pierce. These kind of contests are a good way that you can bet on somebody without saying this guy's going to blow up this week. You can say, I think he's going to do better than what the market expects this week. I'm not sure that he's going to be awesome, and I have options on my fantasy team that I like better, but I think he's going to do better than expectation. This is a good way to be able to play that.
Yeah, I think it's like a range of outcome thing with these over-unders. What percent of the time does Pierce not hit 60 rushing yards? And to me, it's, maybe a third of the time, like if the Texans really get blown out in this game. So I definitely like that over. We have him projected for 70 rushing yards.
Yeah, so go to either Underdog or Sleeper. You enter the Draft Sharks promo code. They'll match your first deposit. Go play. I got some bets in already. Chicago at the Giants here. Giants by 3.5, over-under of 39.5. And anytime that the over-under starts with a 3, you want to be less interested in that for fantasy purposes. What's the latest on David Montgomery for the Bears?
He did not practice on Wednesday. I think it's knee and ankle he's on the injury report with. We haven't really heard of official diagnosis. That Bears are still saying like day to day, but at this point, because Montgomery was ruled out pretty quickly when he got hurt in that game last week, so that always kind of tells me it's something at least semi-serious. And then no practice on Wednesday. I would at this point, I'm assuming Montgomery's not going to play, and that obviously makes Khalil Herbert a fantasy option. He to me, he's like, Montgomery's had a good start to the season. Herbert still looks like the better runner to me. I think he's going to have success in this game on the ground. The Giants are not a great run defense. The question for me, when you're talking about Herbert's like upside, is how much he's going to do in the passing game, because he has not been great in the passing game through his first season and 3 games. The Bears do have Treston Ebner, a rookie who did some passing game stuff in college. So you could see Herbert lose some snaps to Ebner in the passing game, but I think Herbert is going to get you 15 to 20 carries in this one.
Yeah, I mean, the Bears are going to throw the ball 16 times. So there are only so many snaps to lose in that area. The diagnosis on David Montgomery, by the way, is that I bet on him last week. So his leg just crumpled under that pressure, because that's what happens every single time that I do it.
Yeah, it's when he's a popular DFS play. I remember last Thanksgiving he was super popular in that game against the Lions. I think he got hurt in that game as well. It's happened multiple times where he's like DFS chalk and then leaves the game.
Yeah, his body just can't hold up to it. It crumples under that pressure. So yeah, Khalil Herbert's an easy start if Montgomery's out. We'll watch and see what happens. And absolutely nobody else in the Chicago offense, at least until they top 20 passes in an NFL game. On the Giants side, Sterling Shepard, you got to feel bad for. Tore his left ACL at the very end of a game that they were out of anyway. Same leg where he tore his Achilles tendon last year. That at least can be a defibrillator for Kadarius Toney. Now, Toney did not play in that game, had the hamstring injury, still not practicing Wednesday, so we'll see if he's even playing this week. I don't think you can put him in any lineups yet, so it doesn't really matter his specific status for this week. But before that, week 3, he did see a boost to his playing time from week 1 to 2. And, I mean, we're still talking about an offense that absolutely needs him to do something this year. They're starting David Sills V, who has 8 targets through 3 games.
Yeah, I think Toney and Wan'Dale Robinson, who he's still out with his knee injury, but should be back within the next few weeks. I think both those guys are worth stashing because, it's Richie James, David Sills, and then it's Kenny Galladay and Darius Slayton, who I think the Giants hate those 2 guys more than they hate Kadarius Toney. So either Toney or Robinson, maybe both of them, are going to get on the field when they're healthy. I think Richie James is the guy to. I think Richie James is now like Greg Dortch. For the Giants, like he might get 6, 7, 8 targets right now, with the state of this wide receiver core. And he's not exciting. He's not a big play threat, especially in this offense. But if you need 10 to 12 PPR points, I think Richie James could be an option this week.
I'm a fan of Richie James, so I'm not against it. 6 and 5 targets in 3 games so far, which is, good for Richie James, but also a signal of how bad things are for the Giants offense. To be honest, not really a knock on Richie James. He's just a guy who's been in the league for 4 years, was a 7th round pick, hasn't stuck anywhere despite, flashing here and there. And he has kick return upside. So like, he's the kind of player that should be able to stick on a roster. Maybe if he had landed with the Patriots at some point, he'd be one of those guys that's just a Patriot for 12 years and he pops up every once in a while for a game, but he hasn't been able to stick anywhere yet. So that's how things are going in the Giants pass offense right now.
Yeah, the Shepard injury that leaves behind 26% of the Giants targets through the first 3 games. That's a huge opening as far as targets go. Daniel Bellinger is a guy I picked up for cheap in a couple FFPC leagues last night. I don't think he's very good, and this offense, obviously, the passing game isn't very good. But we did see Bellinger season highs in that Monday night game against the Cowboys with 5 targets, 4 catches, and 40 yards. Still only ran a route on about half the pass play, so we definitely need that to climb. But it does seem like his role has grown over the past 3 weeks, and they need bodies out there with Shepard out.
Yeah, I mean, he is a rookie, so it's fair to think that there's room for his role to keep growing.
Yep.
Yeah, we'll see where that goes. Certainly nothing exciting. It's Saquon Barkley and chill on this offense if you can help it. Yeah. Seattle at Detroit, Lions by 4 in this one, over under 48. And Jared, Geno Smith. Is it Geno Smith for the win after 325 yards passing in week 3?
Quarterback 7 last week in fantasy points. He was quarterback 17 in week 1. He was quarterback 30 in week 2. But I mean, he's been decent. This is a good matchup. I don't think you need to go his way in one quarterback leagues, but I think he's a pretty nice quarterback too this week.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be somebody who's like, should I start Geno Smith this week over Tom Brady or whatever? And it's like, I mean, might he outscore him? Yeah. Can I comfortably tell you to go ahead and start Geno Smith? No. Can I say there's enough chance that he's better that you can do it if you really want to? Yeah, that's kind of where I end up landing. It's like, you can make a case for it, but it's really a gut call. I'm probably going to play Tom Brady. I'm probably not rostering Geno Smith in a 1 quarterback league, but am I going to bet you money that Tom Brady outscores him this week? No.
Seattle is 9th in neutral pass rate right now. Like they were never anywhere close to 9th with Russell Wilson there. So I don't know what's going on.
And neutral is still the way to describe this offense on whole. DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, basically even every week. They were both undervalued preseason. Lockett, especially because he's short. I'm watching to see if Jeff Okudah is a factor here. And, I mentioned him earlier. He's a corner for Detroit who was originally like the 3rd overall pick, I believe, a few years ago. Missed, I think it was all of last year, almost all of last year with an injury. It was either last year or the year before. But Pro Football Focus intern Arjun Manan tweeted Monday some matchup numbers for Jeff Okudah. And he has spent time in coverage on A.J. Brown, on Devontae Smith, on Terry McLaurin, and on Justin Jefferson through 3 games so far. And based on the numbers, Okudah might be limiting how often quarterbacks are targeting those guys. If you look at week 1, he faced Devontae Smith 21 times, 21 different snaps, and Devontae Smith got 1 target in that game. Now, we watched that game. We saw A.J. Brown dominate targets, and we're like, oh, Jalen Hurts is throwing to his best friend. Maybe that was a thing. It's also possible that they were like, wow, Devontae Smith is blanketed right now. I'm just going to throw it to A.J. Brown. Week 3, he covered Jefferson on 31 snaps. Jefferson got 4 targets among those 31 snaps, caught 2 of them. So, like I said, maybe I'm not saying watch out for Jeff Okudah in matchups right now. I'm saying, let's see if this is a factor. And I think if I am deciding between DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett this week, DK Metcalf's much more likely to face Jeff Okudah more often in coverage. So that's enough for me to be like, all right, these 2 guys are kind of on a seesaw for me week in, week out anyway. So this week I'm going to go with Tyler Lockett, who's not facing that potential factor.
Yeah, I think that's fair if you're picking between them. To me, I'm not going to alter my Metcalf ranking much, if at all. I mean, I think, first of all, I think Metcalf is good enough, big enough, fast enough to be any corner in the NFL, and even if Jeff Okudah is an elite corner. To me, the matchup thing is it just pushes Lockett up the rankings. Because, maybe it does mean some more action is funneled his way if Geno Smith doesn't want to attack Okudah. So, Metcalf and Lockett are both in like the mid-20s among wide receivers in our rankings. I think they're both pretty nice starts, again, in a good matchup against Detroit in a game that could be a lot higher scoring than people think it's going to be. These teams met last year, and it was a shootout late in the season. And, Detroit's offense wasn't nearly as good as it is right now.
Mm-hmm. On the Detroit side, TJ Hawkinson did not practice Wednesday with a foot injury. Amon-Ra St. Brown was not practicing because of his ankle injury. Kicker Austin Seibert was out with a groin injury. And to me, that's you go ahead and drop a kicker who misses Wednesday practice, regardless of status. DJ Chark limited with an ankle injury. So we'll see where everybody is as we move through the week among those guys. DeAndre Swift, though, seems likely to miss at least the next 2 games leading up to the week 6 bye.
Yes, that's what it sounds like. So I think you're going to get a Jamal Williams game here. We saw 3 games from Williams that Swift missed all, or at least most of last season. Jamal Williams averaged 17 carries and 2 targets across those 3 games. And, he's in a better offense this year behind an O-line that's playing better. And he gets this matchup against Seattle, dead last in our adjusted fantasy points allowed. They've given up 5.1 yards per carry through running back. So it's just a great spot for Jamal Williams. I think if you have him, you're very likely starting Williams this week.
Yes, I agree. And certainly worth picking up if you don't have him. There are lots of questions about that this week. One specific that I came across that's tougher is, do I drop A.J. Dillon for Jamal Williams?
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't really want to drop A.J. Dillon for the season to get Jamal Williams. Do I think Jamal Williams is going to outscore? Is he likely to outscore A.J. Dillon over the next 2 weeks? Yeah, I would bet that Jamal Williams scores more points over the next 2 weeks. So if I need that guy for 2 weeks because my RBs are shambles otherwise, then I guess I could see the move in that case. Overall, though, I'd much rather have A.J. Dillon for the full season.
Yeah, so would I. Dillon over Williams rest of the way. That's got to be such a shallow league, though, that there's probably other quality guys available on the waiver wires. Especially if that team is 0-3 and is desperate for a win this week, then maybe the Williams for or Dillon out, Williams in move makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I've also seen do I drop Carson Wentz for Jared Goff this week? And we do have Jared Goff ahead of Carson Wentz. And these guys are in a range where I think it's okay to just say, yeah, I like this guy better this week, so I'm going to drop this one to pick him up. We'll talk about Carson Wentz in a few minutes, but this is the range I'm looking at in this week's rankings, Jared. Derek Carr, Trevor Lawrence, Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, Carson Wentz. And those guys are in order directly from our rankings. I could see those 7 finish in absolutely any order this week, but I do like Jared Goff's spot better than Carson Wentz's.
Yeah, me too. I wouldn't be shocked if Wentz outscores Goff, but I pretty clearly prefer Goff this week. He's been decent in fantasy so far. He's gone quarterback 19, quarterback 7, and then quarterback 18. We talked about the Lions have the high implied total this week, one of the highest on the entire week, and then Seattle is 31st in Football Outsiders pass defense rankings, 28th in adjusted points allowed to quarterback. So, yeah, Jared Goff, quarterback 11 in our rankings this week. The highest he's been since his Rams days, I'm sure.
And we get plenty rest of the way questions about guys like this. Neither Jared Goff nor Carson Wentz is a guy I'm saying, yes, bet on him the rest of the way. So I think if we're talking about that group of players, Derek Carr, Trevor Lawrence, Kirk Cousins are the guys that I feel best about rest of the way. Tua is close to them, but a little bit more fragile, I think, than those 3.
Yeah, if you're making decisions like Goff versus Wentz, to me, that's totally who you prefer for this week because neither guy is a mustache for the rest of the season.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from that game?
Nope.
Jacksonville at Philadelphia. Eagles by 6.5 in this one because apparently the odds makers did not watch last week's Jaguars. Over under of 47. So we get a Jacksonville offense that was shockingly good against the Chargers last week. We get an Eagles defense that's been excellent the past 2 weeks against the Vikings and the Commanders. What happens when these two meet each other on Sunday? Honest answer is I have no idea. And I think that's important. It sounds like a cop-out, but I think it's important to realize that we're so early in the season that if you assume that you know things, you're a lot of time, you're going to be wrong just as often as you're right. And if you are sure one way or the other, not only do you run the risk of missing out, but you also run the risk of confirming your own bias in the coming week. If you say, oh, Jacksonville was awesome last week. They were good. They were awesome the week before. They're definitely ready to go. Trevor Lawrence was the first overall pick. Doug Peterson's done it before. It's definitely Jacksonville. And then if they go score on Philadelphia this week, you're like, yeah, see, I was right. And then later in the season, you're like, I was right about this offense before. I'm going to be right again. Then you make the wrong call there. So maybe it's just me getting older, Jared, but I have come away from making, hot take picks on stuff like that and realized I don't know as much as I think I do. None of us really knows as much as we think we do. We'll make an educated guess here and we'll make sure that we're not overstating.
Yeah, there's some levels of learning thing where the first step is admitting that you don't know anything, that you can kind of start to improve from there. But Lawrence did it last week in a tough matchup against the Chargers. Now the Eagles' pass defense is even better. Looking at adjusted points allowed to quarterbacks or Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA, and that implied total for Jacksonville is scary if you're starting Lawrence. 19.75. That's low. So the bookmakers aren't totally buying into this Jags offense yet. But man, we talked about Lawrence so much this summer and saying that he could really break out this season with a legitimate coaching staff. And it sure looks to me like that's happening. I mean, he was so good in that win over the Chargers. If he's going to play that well, like I'm not going to say he's matchup proof, but he can put up decent fantasy points even in a tough matchup like this.
Yeah, and I mentioned that range of quarterbacks earlier, and he was second in that range, which I believe starts at QB8 in our rankings this week, right behind Derek Carr. And that's how I would play him, because we're talking about a bunch of guys that could go in any direction, and it could be a difficult matchup, and maybe it does make us regret having played Trevor Lawrence this week. But we are talking about a guy with supreme talent. He was the number 1 overall pick. He's got plenty of pass catching talent around him. He's got an experienced head coach. They were terrific the past 2 weeks. So I feel best about playing Trevor Lawrence among that group of players. Am I sure that he's going to do it this week? Absolutely not. But I feel best about him this week. And I also like the chances of him turning into somebody that we can rely on for most weeks going forward ahead of those other quarterbacks in that range.
For sure. Yeah. I like him over all those guys. Besides Derek Carr, I don't know if you included him in there. And I would definitely not go dropping Trevor Lawrence for those other types. Cause I'm with you. I do think he has the best chance to be like a weekly low end quarterback one.
We got a question from Brian Draper on Facebook. He's got Hollywood Browns, got Christian Kirk, got Mike Williams. Since we've already hit 2 of those teams so far, I think it's a good time to answer it. Wants to start 2 among those players. I'm not sure if it's PPR or another format. What do you like, Jared, between Hollywood Brown, Christian Kirk, Mike Williams? Who's sitting?
Kirk's actually, I mean, assuming it's PPR, Kirk's the one I'm playing first, actually. And then between the other two, I'd probably lean Williams over Brown just because I feel better about the Chargers offense getting going than the Cardinals offense. Although, Brown's a better target bet than Williams for sure.
Yeah, and Marquise Brown's actually a little bit ahead of Mike Williams in our PPR rankings. And that's who I would play because I'm chasing targets there and I feel better about Marquise Brown's target share. And, I don't feel awesome about either of the offenses right now. If Justin Herbert were healthy, that might change it a little bit. But for me, it's definitely Kirk first. And then I'm probably slightly leaning Brown over Williams.
Yeah, so Kirk has the good matchup in this game in the slot, right? He's going to avoid Darius Slay. So he's already been the Jags target leader, and I would expect that to continue in this game.
Evan Ingram's also in a positive spot. The Eagles 11th most friendly to tight ends so far. So it's not like a blow up spot for tight ends. And obviously, like I said, we're only in week 4. We got 3 games going, but the Eagles have been a negative matchup for wide receivers. So he's at least in a better spot than the wideouts on the outside.
Yeah, 81% route rate for Ingram through 3 weeks, which is awesome. Just a 13.5% target share. We need that to climb a little bit, but I think it will if he's out there for that many pass routes.
Mm-hmm. On the others, well, actually, we should probably talk about the backfield, but it's like only because James Robinson has become a guy that you have to start.
Yeah. So we still haven't seen negative game script for the Jags, which is crazy to say through 3 weeks. Like, I'm still curious to see if they fall behind by a couple scores in this game.
They were trailing Washington week 1, weren't they?
Yeah, but not like, I don't think it was ever more than a 1-score game. Like, they weren't in like pure catch up mode at any point in that game. So I'm just curious to see exactly what it looks like when we do get that. But yeah, I mean, Robinson, tough not to start. The Eagles' run defense has not been that good through 3 games, so it's a decent spot for James Robinson. And then Travis Etienne's very fringy PPR play.
Well, so we just need 1 50-yard touchdown from James Robinson, and his day is made. Everything else is gravy.
I can't remember who tweeted it, but someone pointed out Robinson has like 3 long runs so far this season, and outside of those, he's like under 3 yards per carry. So I'm definitely not giving up on Etienne yet.
Yeah, the other side of that, though, is if James Robinson's already broken 3 long runs through 3 games, then there's no reason to bet against him running at this point.
I think he got faster post Achilles tear. It's crazy.
Yeah, I'm gonna go tear my Achilles and see if maybe I can get my career jump started.
Probably don't want to do that.
I don't know. At least it'll get people serving me drinks and food around here for a little while.
Right.
On the Philly side, we got Devontae Smith limited Wednesday with a back issue. Miles Sanders limited with a hip issue. I think anytime that Miles Sanders shows up on the injury report, you're like, uh-oh. But we'll see where things go with that. Not a worrisome spot yet. Devontae Smith, Jared, what's the case for him not sitting higher than 33rd in our PPR rankings this week?
We saw him goose egg in week 1, and I still think he's going to be volatile from week to week. And then, we've just seen 2 of his, we saw the one, he was wide receiver 1 in fantasy. He led all receivers in fantasy points last week. Even in week 2, he only finished wide receiver 30 that week. I mean, he didn't score a touchdown. That always swings that stuff wildly. But that I haven't really changed my mind on Smith yet. What I've changed is that this Eagles passing game is way better than I thought it was going to be. So that definitely helps. Jonathan Smith gives him a higher ceiling than I expected. But I still think he's going to be volatile from week to week. He's going to be a bit frustrating. There's going to be games where it's 12 targets to AJ Brown and 8 to Dallas Goedert, and Devontae Smith only gets 5. So you're going to have to live with that. But this Eagles passing game looks so good that Smith's definitely going to have more big games going forward.
Yeah, I think he's in a range where the rankings are really more nebulous. Like it's easier to say, this guy is 14 this week because they'll jump around some. But once you get down to like 25 to 40 some weeks, it's like there's not usually a whole lot separating those guys. So if you really have a strong feeling for one versus the other, if you're reading potential game script, there's plenty of room to make your own decisions in that range. Devontae Smith's a guy that I would be scared to sit right now. Among guys around him in the rankings currently, I'm playing him over Bateman. I'm playing him over the Saints. I'm playing him over the Jets, and I'm playing him over Juju Smith-Schuster. And then you get into the range of Gabe Davis, Curtis Samuel, Seahawks. That's where it's kind of a toss-up for me.
I knew Juju was going to be on that list for you. I don't know. It's definitely close. Like, to me, Bateman's pretty similar to Devontae Smith, honestly. Like, there's fewer guys in Baltimore, but Bateman's usage has kind of been all over the map too. I just like that game environment quite a bit better, so I would probably lean towards Bateman there.
All right, we'll get to that specific game here pretty soon. Devontae Smith versus Juju Smith-Schuster is just a mismatch in talent.
Yeah, I have no argument there, but I mean, it's still Patrick Mahomes, top wide receiver.
Well, we'll talk about that when we get to that game, but I think that might be the disconnect here. Rashad Bateman, by the way, not spending as much time on the field as Devontae Smith relative to dropback. So I think that's a nudge in Smith's favor, but we'll talk more about Bateman when we get to that game as well. Anybody else from the Philly game?
No, Miles Sanders disappointed last week in fantasy, but his usage was like right where it was the first 2 weeks. So he didn't score. He wasn't as efficient on the ground. This is a tough matchup. Again, Jacksonville's defense has been good against the pass and against the run. Sanders is a running back 3 this week, but again, nothing changed with his usage in week 3.
Mm-hmm. Jets at Pittsburgh. Steelers by 3.5 here, over under 41.5. Not a game that anybody should watch considering the quarterbacks. What does Zach Wilson's impending return mean for this offense, Jared?
I mean, the first thing with the Jets passing game, and this isn't, knock against Wilson, but the pass volume's coming down because they've averaged 52 pass. I heard Mike Shope say last night on the Deep End podcast that it's an NFL record for most pass attempts through the first 3 games of the season, 52 pass attempts per game. So that's coming down, which, is going to mean fewer targets for all these guys. I don't love Zach Wilson, but Joe Flacco wasn't playing well. He had a 59% completion rate and 5.8 yards per attempt. So it's a pretty low bar for Wilson to clear to be an upgrade for this passing game. So I do think he might be an upgrade for the passing game in general. And then, getting more specific into positions, Jets running backs and wide receivers have combined for 41% of the team's targets through the first 3 games of the season. I think that number is coming down. So I think Tyler Conklin's target rate is probably coming down a little bit. I think the running backs' target shares are probably coming down a bit too. And then you're going to see, obviously more targets go to Elijah Moore and Garrett Wilson and Corey Davis.
Yeah. So Jared gave you a nice breakdown of that. My answer is I have no idea because we haven't seen this group play any football games together yet. So, there are definitely reasons to have thoughts in all of those directions, but Zach Wilson was not good for running back targets last year. That was a small sample. We'll see if that changes this year. And then he just hasn't played with this collection of players. So we have no idea if he thinks the same way about Garrett Wilson that Joe Flacco does, or if it's just the offense that's funneling things to Garrett Wilson. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that Garrett Wilson is the top wide receiver here, by the slight margin that it has been so far, because as we've we talked about it overtly. Elijah Moore is spending more time on the field than Garrett Wilson, but Garrett Wilson's getting targeted much more often per route than Elijah Moore is. So I think for now, we bring in Zach Wilson. We're going to wait and see what changes, but we go ahead and treat the hierarchy as the same as it has been through 3 weeks.
Yeah, Moore did set a season high last week with a 19% target share, so that was encouraging to see if he can, be 19, 20%. Even if Wilson's out targeting him, Moore can be a fantasy factor. And then in the backfield, I mean, did we see the beginning of Breece Hall taking over this backfield? He set season highs last week in snap rate, 51% to 49% from Michael Carter, 48% of the pass routes for Breece Hall last week. That was also a season high 8 carries, season high 11 targets. So So I kind of think I think Hall is gonna play ahead, play more snaps than Michael Carter for the majority of the games the rest of the way.
Yes, I would like to believe that what we just saw was a flip that's going to change how things go going forward. We obviously can't say for sure because we could come back this week and have it be different, but that's how I would guess going forward. And then, the other thing that we have to wait and see is what Zach Wilson means for the targets going that way. I think the one thing we can safely assume is everybody's target volume coming down.
Yes, they're not averaging 52 attempts. They're probably not going to even average 42 pass attempts the rest of the game. So it's going to be pretty significant.
Yeah. Maybe the most important answer is nobody on the Jets is as exciting as you might think he is right now the rest of this season.
Exactly.
Steelers side, we need better quarterbacking still before anybody beyond Deontay Johnson at wide receiver at least is really going to be in play in most cases. It should be Kenny Pickett soon. We have at least, like, Mike Tomlin has stopped saying Mitchell Trubisky's our guy. He's saying stuff like, oh, we're going to evaluate the whole situation, then we'll see how we're moving forward. So I think it's going to be Kenny Pickett soon. I'm going to stop short of saying that's going to be a big boost for the offense, but it certainly can't hurt to bring in somebody that has a chance of playing better than the guy already there. But until then, it's Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth is fine, and Najee Harris is fine.
Yeah, unfortunately, I thought last week was Trubisky's best game of the season so far, and PFF actually had him as the fifth highest graded quarterback on the week. So that I don't expect that play to continue, but probably buys him a few more weeks as the starter. So yeah, you're right. I mean, Deontay Johnson, he's seen 30+% of the targets in all three games so far. He's 20th among receivers in expected fantasy points, but he's just 38th in actual half PPR points. So he's just vastly underperforming the targets he's seeing. I do think that'll improve a bit going forward, but I do think Kenny Pickett would help Deontay Johnson and the rest of these receivers.
I mean, the upshot of the quarterback stuff is that I guarantee you Mike Tomlin's not checking PFF grades. And the Steelers are 1-2 so far, and that win came in overtime against the Bengals. So I'm sure that weighs more heavily in his calculation than it does in PFF grades.
Hopefully.
Anything else in that game?
No.
Cleveland at Atlanta, Browns by 1.5, over under 49. Jared, it's clear that Amari Cooper deserves more weekly attention than any of us were willing to give him before last Thursday.
How about over under a 49 in a Browns Falcons game? That's unbelievable. And looking at the numbers, I think it makes sense. Like I'm definitely not betting the under. But yeah, I mean, Amari Cooper 37 and 36% target shares last 2 weeks. Like any receiver is going to have big games on those type of target shares. So it's good to see. And Jacoby Brissett's playing well. Like he's playing well enough to support Amari Cooper as a weekly fantasy starter. So I have nothing to worry about in this matchup this week. I think Cooper's in wide receiver 2 range in our rankings this week.
Yeah, and certainly belongs up there. We'll see if he can steady out in there. I mean, it's tough to look at 2 straight big weeks and say, yeah, but there's still downside. It's a lot easier to just roll with the guy who did it for you last week. So, we'll see where we go from here. By the way, the over-under is down to 47.5 now that I'm looking at it. So maybe they're not quite as big of believers as they were, but it's still one of the highest of the week. So it's a spot to go for more fantasy value than we might have guessed when we were looking at the schedule coming in. David Njoku had the big game last week. I would love to say that it was a breakout game and we're starting him going forward, but the truth is he had 10 targets in that game after 1 and 5 in the first 2 games. The usage has been there the whole time, so that didn't change in that game. So, I mean, ultimately David Njoku's fine, but we're going to have to watch and see because it's not likely that he has a lot more games that are close in opportunity and production to what he did in week 3.
Yeah, definitely not a must start, but I do think he's an option this week and a pretty good option. I mean, like you said, the route rates had been where we wanted them to be all year, even the first 2 games, even though the targets weren't. So it was nice to see the targets finally start to come. So if that continues, that's good news, obviously. And then this matchup, again, we have the high over under. We have a pretty nice implied total for the Browns. And then Atlanta, 30th in our adjusted points allowed to tight ends. And Football Outsider says them 24th in tight end coverage. So nice individual matchup for Njoku.
Yeah. Backfield is what it is. Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, they're in play weekly. On the other side, Marcus Mariota, the overall numbers suggest that he belongs in the same territory as those QB 1-2 fringe guys that we mentioned earlier. He's probably a little bit flimsier, though, than those players. He had the big rushing day in week 1, 72 yards and a touchdown on the ground on 12 attempts. But since then, just 13 total rushing attempts over 2 games, just 20 total rushing yards in those 2 games. Last week, he had 1 touchdown, but just 4 yards on the ground. He's been under 230 passing yards in each game, despite 2 losses in that span, 26.3 pass attempts per game. The Falcons, the second fewest pass attempts in the league. So, limited volume there, limiting the opportunities. Yep. Marcus Mariota is usable, but might not even be quite as usable as his fantasy totals through 3 weeks suggest.
Well, he's quarterback 12 right now in total fantasy points among quarterbacks, and he's finished week 1 and week 3 as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. But I agree with you; it does feel flimsy. This has been one of the run heaviest offenses in the league. The Falcons are 27th in neutral pass rate. I think they want to continue going that direction. So Mario's going to have some duds. Again, this is a good spot though. Could be a high scoring game. The Browns are 21st in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. They're 27th in adjusted points allowed to quarterback. So would not be shocking if Mariota turns in another top 12 quarterback week.
I did start him over Russell Wilson in 2 leagues last week. I will probably do the same thing again because I certainly don't feel good about Russell Wilson at this point.
We'll get to him.
Cordero Patterson, 22 carries in week 1, playing from ahead, 17 carries in the week 3 win over Seattle. In between, he had an even split with Tyler Algier. I would feel a whole lot better about Patterson if he weren't splitting the receiving work so much with other guys in the backfield, Jared.
Yeah, I love CPAT. He made me a bunch of money last year. I would be looking to sell him hard if I had him. I don't like him in this role. He averaged like 10 carries per game last season, and he couldn't hold up. He totally wore down at the end of the season to the point where Atlanta couldn't give him more than a handful of touches per game. So I want to see a lot fewer carries, and more targets, more route participation. It's just I don't like how you're using him. I don't think it's gonna last. I think he's a fine play this week. I think this game could stay close enough, and the Browns' run D has just been average so far. So maybe you get one more good game out of CPAT, and then looking to sell him next week.
Drake London's role has been excellent. Again, though, the team has attempted the league's second fewest passes. So I think that keeps Drake London from being as comfy a play as he could be. He's another one who's kind of a coin flip in the range of Devontae Smith and Curtis Samuel for me, just for that factor.
I'm starting London. He's just so good. Did you see his touchdown last week?
No.
It was sweet. He caught like a curl at the 5 and spun off a guy, broke a tackle, and got into the end. He's so good. And yeah, the pass volume is a concern, but I think he's going to stay, at 25 to 30% of this team's targets. To me, he's pretty much locked into my lineup every week as a wide receiver 2, unless I'm loaded at the position.
Yeah, I would probably ultimately wind up with him in my lineup, especially over Samuel. Devontae Smith, that would be a scary one this week, but it's closer than it would be if Atlanta were throwing the ball more. Kyle Pitts, you kind of have to play him, but I would sure love to trade Kyle Pitts the first time there's a good opportunity, because last week looks like a get right game. But even if you look at that game, he actually got less playing time in situations where it should be a favorable passing set.
Yeah, that was not great to see. The 68% route rate, that was a seasonal. His route rate's been all over the place these first 3 weeks. But he got a 40% target share last week. He's second among all tight ends in air yards. He's 7th among tight ends in expected fantasy points. You definitely have to reset your expectations. Pitts is not going to return value based on where you draft him. But who are you taking at tight end over Kyle Pitts the rest of the way? Obviously, Kelsey, Andrews. Beyond that, who would you rather have at the position?
Oh, well, let's see about that. It's not.
Waller probably, right? Waller.
Yeah,
Kittle?
I would say Waller. I think Zach Ertz is at least even with Kyle Pitts the rest of the way, because I think he's at least as good a bet for target volume. I would rather have George Kittle. I'd rather have Dallas Goedert. I don't know if you said his name. And then he's just kind of in the mix with everybody else.
I'd much rather have Pitts over Ertz, because Ertz's target volume is going to decline once they get Moore and Hopkins back.
17%.
17% when?
Zach Ertz is at 17% target share so far, so I think he can stay at that level going forward, even after DeAndre Hopkins, Rondale Moore back. If I'm looking to trade Kyle Pitts, it's not me looking to trade him straight up for another tight end, because he certainly could outscore Zach Ertz or George Kittle or whatever the rest of the way. I would use him in a trade that also involves another position, so I can upgrade somewhere else and then get a tight end that I think has a similar outlook.
I just think he's going to be very inconsistent because we talked about this. He's used as a wide receiver, and he's used as like a deep wide receiver. I'm trying to pull up his average depth. He has a 15.7 yard average depth of target. Like, any player with that type of usage is going to be inconsistent. I think he's going to have, some big-ish games at least. I mean, even last week, what he did without scoring a touchdown, he still finished the week, I believe, as a top 5 tight end. So he's not going to be consistent, but I think he's going to give you the spike weeks, and that's tough to find at tight end.
But we're also talking about that in an offense that's not going to favor his target volume or his touchdown chances. So, I'm not saying somebody to give up on completely. I don't think that he's separated from those low tight end 1 guys. Like, I don't think that we're going to end the season with Kyle Pitts way ahead of Pat Freiermuth and Tyler Higbee in fantasy points.
Yeah, maybe not. I also don't think you're going to get a ton for Pitts in the trade right now because I think anyone's excited about him.
Yeah, this is probably not the week yet. Like, he had a positive game, but even that wasn't a big one. So he's the kind of guy that if he goes out for like 116 and a touchdown this week, I'm probably going to see what the market looks like.
That's fair. If you can get, 4th round value from Pitts in a trade, I would probably do it.
And again, it's a package thing. It's not like I'm going out and trading him straight up for a tight end or even like straight up for somebody at another position, because I'm not sure tight end can match wide receiver in 1-to-1 value generally. All right. Anything else from that game?
No.
Tennessee at Indianapolis, Colts by 3 over under 42.5. Treylon Burks, no practice Wednesday. It's an illness, so we'll watch that. But usually those guys end up being able to play by the weekend. Kyle Phillips, limited Wednesday with a shoulder issue. Austin Hooper, no practice with a neck injury. That's not really relevant for Hooper, but if he's out, maybe Jeff Swaim is like a DFS option.
I hope if Hooper's out, that just, funnels more targets Treylon Burks' way. We finally got the playing time last week. He led all Titans wide receivers in pass routes. 97% of the pass plays Burks was running a route on. Now, the reason I played him a ton in DFS last week, and I feel like it was a good play. It just didn't work out. The playing time was there. He just didn't produce. I do wonder if Kyle Phillips being out, because that was one of the reasons I liked the Burks plays, because Phillips was out. I kind of thought they'd have to play Burks a lot more. So I do wonder if Phillips comes back, if Burks' playing time scales back a little bit. But I like this matchup here. The Colts, much tougher against the run than the pass. Football Outsiders says them 2nd in run defense, 27th in pass defense. So I know it won't happen, but Tennessee should actually lean pass in this game. It'd be nice to see. But yeah, I think Burks is, he's not even inside wide receiver 3 range in our rankings, but if you're playing 4 wide receivers and you need that flex spot, I think he's an option.
It's fun to dream, but I think it's Derrick Henry and nobody else here because Tennessee.
That's not going to work. Derrick Henry. So again, the Colts have been good against the run this year. They were good last year. They held Derrick Henry to 3.2 yards per carry in their 2 meetings last year.
And he still carried the ball 28 times in each of those games.
Disgusting.
So they don't want to throw the ball. If you want to get on the phone with Mike Vrabel and tell him what they should do this weekend, I would love to listen to that phone call. But for me, it's Derrick Henry and nobody else from Tennessee unless I have to this week. On the other side, Jonathan Taylor, no practice Wednesday with a toe injury. We'll see where that goes. Have you heard anything about the severity or whatever, the outlook on that?
Let me pull it up. There was a report that it is not serious. It was from Tom Pelissero. Taylor had some soreness coming out of the Chiefs game, but a source told Pelissero that Taylor will be, quote, ready to roll versus the Titans. So it seems like he'll be fine.
It's funny because every time we get a lead running back missing Wednesday practice, people are like, oh God, no Jonathan Taylor this week. Who is the man to own? But it's kind of surprising that all of these running backs don't just get Wednesday off. I would consider doing that. I think as a coach, just being like, dude, we're going to give you the ball a lot. Please sit down Wednesday, and have something to drink.
Yeah.
So
the thing, they allow teams to list players as, DNP with the rest now. So if the coaches would just do that rather than, listing some body part, I think people wouldn't freak out as much.
I mean, if I were a coach, though, I'd probably list it as a body part just to get the freak out because it's fun. So we'll watch and see what happens, but not worried right now. And it's still just Jonathan Taylor and Michael Pittman in this offense. We got Pittman back last week, and he and Naheem Hines were the only 2 Colts to catch more than 3 passes.
Yeah, and a great spot for both those guys, especially Taylor. Tennessee 30th in adjusted points allowed to running backs. Titans have allowed 6.1 yards per carry to running backs so far. So if Taylor is healthy, I think this could be the week that he really gets going.
What if he just stinks now, though? I mean, it's 2 straight relative duds from him, right?
He doesn't stink, but the offense might kind of stink because Matt Ryan stinks.
Yeah, that's for sure. Washington at Dallas, Cowboys by 3, over under 41.5. Carson Wentz, even after a bad fantasy line against the Eagles, still 6th among quarterbacks in points. Cowboys are mid-pack as an adjusted fantasy matchup for quarterbacks right now. They face Tom Brady, face Joe Burrow, face Daniel Jones. So obviously Daniel Jones is a positive matchup, but we're still waiting to see exactly how this sets up as a matchup. But the Cowboys were good in pass defense last year. They played the Bucks and Bengals well in that area. So I'm certainly not excited about the Washington passing game for this one.
Yeah, Dallas 6th in Football Outsiders pass defense, DVOA. So I think that's a better representation of this matchup. Dallas, of course, also has one of the best pass rushes in the NFL. So that's a concern for Carson Wentz. And then you have, Washington with a 19.25 point implied total. So I would not want to be starting Carson Wentz as a quarterback one this week.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, even in a rough week, he's sitting 14th in our rankings right now. So somebody you can use, not somebody you reach to use.
Exactly. Another guy I would love to rank a lot lower, but it's just there's a lot of issues at quarterback this week.
Mm-hmm. Antonio Gibson, I think he's the guy that you got to get out while you can here. J.D. McKissick was ahead of him in receiving usage once again in week 3. Gibson's averaging 3.1 yards per rush. He's 12th in PPR scoring, though, because he had the big receiving game in week 1. He's had touchdowns each of the past 2 weeks, but other than falling across the goal line, there has not been anything going right for him.
Yeah, I don't think he's looked good the last 2 weeks. I thought he looked awesome in week 1, so I was kind of excited about him. And I think he's kind of stunk the past 2 weeks. None of the usage in the backfield has surprised me yet. It's a direct correlation. The more Washington is trailing in games, the more J.D. McKissick, the less Antonio Gibson. Washington is 3.5 point underdogs in this one, so it's not great for Gibson. But I also think it's a game that should stay relatively close when you have the Cooper Rush still under center for Dallas. So I think Gibson's okay this week. I'm with you though. If you can somehow sell him for anything decent at this point, I think that's a good move because it looks like we're gonna get Brian Robinson back within the next few weeks.
Yeah, there are some players where I'll say, check the price, but don't feel like you have to get rid of them for whatever you can get. Gibson's a guy I would say go ahead and trade for whatever of actual value you can get.
Hayden Hurst?
That's not a trade.
I'm joking.
I wouldn't trade him to get Kyle Pitts. No, I might.
Wait, would you?
No, I might move Antonio Gibson to get Kyle Pitts. I would have to. I'm not sure what my situation would be where that's actually what I'm thinking about, but that's maybe a signal of how I feel about Antonio Gibson. He's somebody who could just be worthless like 3 weeks from now.
Yes.
Dallas side, CeeDee Lamb might be blossoming. We'll see what Michael Gallup means when he comes back. Hasn't gotten there yet. Sounded like he was getting close for the Monday night game, but didn't play in that one. And then Dalton Schultz was also out for that game. So we're going to have to watch his knee. It sounded, Jared, like he wanted to play and the team was like, nah.
Yeah, it sounded like he at least had a chance and he was limited again in Wednesday's practice. So it's a PCL injury for him. So I don't know. He'd be a tough call if he ends up playing, unless he gets in like a full practice on Friday and is not on the injury report. Otherwise, I think he's probably going to stay in tight end 2 range in our rankings. Awesome stuff from CeeDee Lamb. I mean, he's getting the massive target shares that he kind of hadn't gotten his first couple seasons. 37% of Dallas's targets over the last 2 weeks with Cooper Rush. And Lamb has now had, 3 nice, I guess two big fantasy games and 1 solid fantasy game with Cooper Rush. This is a nice matchup against Washington. Their corners have been getting roasted. So I think, Lamb, not quite a wide receiver 1, but I think he's like a really strong wide receiver 2.
Tony Pollard, on the other hand, receiving usage, very disappointing so far. Less than half of the routes of Zeke Elliott in that game against the Giants.
I don't understand that. Now, the good news is, Pollard looked awesome in the game against the Giants as he tends to do. And his carries have also gone 6 in week 1, 9 in week 2, 13 in week 3. I think you could get a number like 13 this week again in a game that Dallas, should either be playing with the lead or at least close enough where they can keep running the ball.
Yeah, I thought Cooper Rush would be better for his target count, but if he's not on the field enough to get those targets, then you can't get the ball to him there. But I mean, it should be having Cooper Rush in there should be good for his carry volume because Dallas is probably not going to want to throw the ball as much with Cooper Rush as with Dak Prescott. I was surprised in the underdog pick'em last week, you could get, I believe it was Tony Pollard plus 6.5 carries versus Zeke Elliott in that game. To me, that was an easy bet.
I don't remember how we had him projected, but it hit, right? So
it certainly did. Buffalo at Baltimore, Bills by 3, over under 51. Isaiah McKenzie is no more a play now than he was a week ago, despite the numbers that he put up in Miami. It was the insane passing volume that inflated his production and the whole passing offense.
Right, 90 plays and 63 pass attempts for the Bills. So that's like literally a game and a half's worth of plays and pass attempts. So that inflated everything. And McKenzie still split with Jameis and Crowder. 55% of their routes for McKenzie, 49% for Crowder. So you still can't trust either guy in fantasy lineups. I'm still not trusting Devin Singletary in fantasy lineups, despite his massive receiving game. 11 targets, 17% target share. So it is a good target share. If he can stay anywhere near that, then he'll be usable. But Singletary saw a 7% target share over the first 2 games of the season. So again, I'm not buying into what we saw last week yet.
Yeah, I would say trusting Devin Singletary is too strong because he's dominating. So the positive is he's dominating the backfield. It started closer in week 1. It has spread apart in the 2 ensuing games. He's well ahead of Zach Moss and James Cook in playing time and in receiving usage, and we love that side of it. The other side is he had 10 touches in week 1. He had 8 touches in week 2. He had 18 in week 3, but again, it was that target volume inflating everything. He's got no more than 9 carries in any game. He had less than 20 rushing yards each of the past 2 weeks. So he's still the clear number 1 running back in an offense that doesn't like running backs. So you can use him. I would rather play him over either of the Dolphins running backs. I would rather play him over J.D. McKissic, but it's certainly not to the point where you're like, oh, Devin Singletary should be in the top 24.
Yes, he's definitely an RB3 or flex option, especially in PPR. I just, don't go expecting Singletary to be catching 4 or 5 balls a game going forward. I mean, again, maybe that's the case if the target share stays at 15+%, but I kind of am betting against that.
He does have 6 more opportunities on the season than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, by the way, so far.
And that's why CEH is the biggest sell in fantasy football.
Oh yeah. On the Baltimore side of this game, well, I guess we could talk Buffalo if you want, but I'm not sure there's a whole lot more analysis. I mean, other guys are kind of they're kind of what we expected at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Dawson Knox has been this disappointing guy on the Bills offense. His route rates are way down from last season. He's been 60% in week 2, 59% in week 3. He has just an 8% target share. So he's still going to score some touchdowns. So he'll pop from time to time, but he's not going to be nearly reliable enough unless that usage improves.
Yeah. On the Baltimore side now, J.K. Dobbins was limited Wednesday with a chest issue. That's what we needed. It was another injury to watch with J.K. Dobbins. We'll see where that goes. It was an even backfield split between him and Justice Hill. I would assume that we give more to J.K. Dobbins as we go, but I got to see it before I'm playing him in lineups if I can help it.
Harbaugh was talking up Justice Hill big time the other day, saying he knew he had star potential, and we finally saw it in week 3. So we'll see where that goes. I mean, to me, Dobbins, limited as expected, did not look like his explosive self, which is not a surprise either. 3.3 yards per carry for Dobbins in that game last week. So for me, we either need to see the playing time climb a lot or him just looking better before you can even consider putting him in a fantasy lineup.
I don't know. I mean, John Harbaugh is a middle-aged white dude. He might just think Justice Hill is like a DC lawyer show on CBS.
It is one of the better names in the NFL.
So the other guy to keep in mind here is Gus Edwards, because this week marks the last game that he has to stay on the PUP. We'll see. He can be on it beyond that. He does still have a 21-day window beyond when they activate him to either join the active roster or head to IR. So we'll see where that is. But Gus Edwards is a guy to maybe stash in deeper leagues and just kind of watch reports on to see what they expect once he's ready.
Yeah, I haven't heard any updates on Edwards since the season started. I don't know if that's good or bad.
Yeah, I keep seeing things like, oh, he's progressing well, which doesn't really mean anything. Most guys don't publicly progress poorly. So we'll see where it goes. Rashad Bateman's usage, it's just been fine so far. And my question is, why is he not always in route? He's easily the team's top wideout. The targets could be a little bit more explained away. We've got about twice as many for Mark Andrews versus what Bateman's got. He's still solidly ahead of everybody else on the team, but the usage just not quite as high for Bateman as I would like for somebody in what his role I think should be.
At least it's improving. He was 71% of the routes in week 1, 74 in week 2, actually a season high 79% last week. So hopefully he can keep climbing, get into the mid 80s, kind of where we'd like him to be. Last week he got shut down by a Patriots defense that tends to shut down lead wide receivers. Now, Bateman has another tough matchup this week against the Bills, who, the secondary is all sorts of banged up, but their defense just seems to still be good despite losing all these bodies. I mean, they gave up 100 yards to Jalen Waddle last week, but that was, on a, one or two big plays. They shut down Tyreek Hill for the most part. So it's another tough matchup for Rashad Bateman. What you like is, that there are I think this is the only game I'm excited about from a fantasy perspective on the entire week, a game that really should shoot out. So, if that happens, that's good news for Bateman's outlook.
I hope it's a shootout. We'll see if the Bills are just nah, we're just better than everybody this year. I mean, that's coming off a loss, so it sounds kind of silly, but they had 90 plays versus 30 for the Dolphins last week. That game was a few goofball plays away from being a lopsided Bills win.
Yep, for sure.
All right. Anything else from this particular game?
No.
Arizona at Carolina, Panthers by 1.5, over under 42.5. Kicker Matt Prater limited Wednesday with a hip injury. He out. Toss him off the roster. He's limited with an injury because that's too much risk. Rondale Moore limited in practice Wednesday. It's the first time he practiced since suffering that hamstring injury in the Thursday practice of week 1. So, I mean, is there a chance we get some Rondale Moore this week?
Come on, Rondale. I want to see it. I want to see him in this role. Greg Dortch has been playing. Rondale Moore would be, I think, a weekly wide receiver 3 if he's, playing the role that Greg Dortch. I think he's better than Greg Dortch, more explosive. He can make more big plays off these short passes. So I even if Moore plays, I would not trust him this week. I'm even not entirely convinced that Moore is going to take over that job from Dortch right away. I don't know. It's freaking Cliff Kingsbury. So I think he should. I mean, to me, Dortch he's fine. He does what he's supposed to do, but he's not adding anything to the offense. I think Moore can.
So that's one of those situations where if we are sitting here and judging from our perspective, then sure, you want to give more to the more talented guy. But I mean, in reality, if you are dealing with a team of humans and this guy has been playing well for you for 3 weeks, if you just cast him aside just because your former second round pick is back and ready to play, I think that you risk losing players. And, I know that you want to make it a business, but there's definitely something to that. You got to respect guys that have been doing it for you. So I would bet that we get some kind of split right away. And it's, it's not like Dortch is a schlub, but Rondale Moore should certainly be better than Greg Dortch going forward. Yeah. If he's not, then they made a terrible draft pick on him. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you're not trusting Moore in lineups this week, but I would go grab him now if he's available in your league.
And of course, since we're talking about the Arizona offense, I want to remind everybody that they're nowhere near as good as they should be if their coach didn't suck, because relative to talent and opportunity, that's what the offense has done so far is suck. Kyler Murray, 17th in PFF passing grade. I mean, that's okay, but it could be better. And the Cardinals overall, 31st in offensive DVOA, 30th in passing DVOA, 14th rushing. So clearly James Conner is the guy to bet on here, and Cliff Kingsbury is the guy to bet against.
I mean, this is a whole nother level. I mean, if you look at DVOA stuff, the Cardinals have been above average the past couple seasons. Not great, not where I think they could be with a better coach. But this is, it's so ugly right now. And I think we underrated how bad this offensive line was going to be and how bad it's been so far. That's hurting James Conner too, obviously. And then the wide receiver core. I mean, when AJ Green's getting that many snaps, and Green's out now, by the way, which I don't know, could be addition by subtraction, although it's probably going to be Andy Isabella getting some of those snaps, so we'll see what happens there. But I don't know, I'm just hoping with Rondale Moore back, and then we'll get DeAndre Hopkins back, that'll spark something. The other thing with Kyler has been the lack of rushing. He's just not running at the same level he had the previous 2 seasons. The designed rushing stuff just hasn't been there, which again is again on Cliff Kingsbury.
Yeah, but that's the thing that I don't think we should expect to come back, because I don't think that's what they want to do. I hope that as a team they face plant this year so that Cliff Kingsbury gets fired and we get somebody that can actually unlock the offensive talent, because there's a lot of that there regardless of the offensive line's play.
Yep, true.
On the Carolina side, Christian McCaffrey was out Wednesday and people were in a frenzy. Got a thigh injury. ESPN's David Newton says that Matt Rule seemed like it was no big deal. Matt Rule didn't say this is no big deal, but the report was he seemed like it. So we'll see about Christian McCaffrey's Thursday participation. Everybody in response to Christian McCaffrey being out was like, okay, who's the guy in this backfield if McCaffrey doesn't play? The answer is nobody. There is no the guy here. There's Chuba Hubbard. There's Deontay Foreman. They played 12 and 14 snaps total respectively through 3 games. They each have 4 carries and 0 targets. They split first team work in the preseason, and neither has given us any reason to believe that he can be a good receiver through his young career so far.
I mean, Christian McCaffrey is having to battle for fantasy points on this offense. I mean, what's it going to look like if it's Chuba Hubbard and Dante Foreman in there? Yeah, so there's very few situations where I'm not interested in the handcuff, but this is one of them. I'm not really rostering any guy either of those guys if I can help it. Again, McCaffrey, everything has been there usage-wise that we want to see: the snaps, the routes, the carries, the target share. It's just Baker Mayfield's holding back this entire offense.
I'll be curious to see if Laviska Shenault could even be in the backfield mix, assuming he's healthy. He's of course got an injury that's hurting him this week.
Of course he does.
It's like an offense that you don't really want to bet on anything right now. You can, if you're in a deep enough league, you can stash either Foreman or Hubbard, but don't expect either one to emerge as a starter for you this week. DJ Moore, wide receiver 38 in our PPR rankings, and he belongs down there, and it's sad.
Yeah, I mean, same deal with McCaffrey. Usage is there, 23.5% target share, but Baker's just not letting anything live on this offense. It's funny too. I remember we talked after week 1 how pass heavy Carolina went. They were 82% neutral pass in week 1. That dropped to 62% in week 2. That dropped to 42% in week 3. So Matt Rule is we've seen Baker. We don't believe in Baker. We're just going to try to hide him the rest of the season.
Yeah, but what Matt Rule said this week was he expects Baker Mayfield to play great. He said great. So I don't know if he just ate Frosted Flakes that morning. I don't know if he's getting fully into coach speak or if he just didn't watch the first 3 weeks of games.
The neutral pass rates speak much more loudly than anything Matt Rule actually says.
That's enough of that game, right?
Yeah.
All right. Denver at Las Vegas. Raiders by 2.5, over under 45.5. Melvin Gordon limited Wednesday with a neck issue. And let's use that to get into the Denver running backs first, because Javonte Williams, we thought that his issue would be sharing too much work. Now he's not only sharing with Melvin Gordon, he's also sharing with Mike Boone because he's just a magnanimous running back.
25% of the pass routes for Mike Boone in that Sunday night game. I don't know, but I remember we saw that happen in the Jets backfield with Ty Johnson. What was it, in week 2? Then he kind of went away in week 3. Hopefully that's what happens with Mike Boone. But that would definitely be a problem for Javonte because he'd been scoring a bunch of his fantasy points through the passing game. He kind of needs that if this Broncos offense isn't going to score more than it has so far.
Yeah. I mean, this was the issue that we thought that was going to be there for Javonte Williams. We don't want Mike Boone to be involved. We'll see. Maybe it was a 1-game thing. The offense, clearly, they're trying to figure things out. They have no clue what they're doing so far. So that's both the downside and the upside here.
Yeah.
Is if they figure it out, there's enough talent there that these guys could all still help our teams. But we're through 3 weeks, and it doesn't look like they're figuring anything out yet.
So here's the reason to be at least semi-optimistic about the Broncos offense. And I stole this from our friend Josh Norris from Underdog Fantasy, but the Broncos have scored a touchdown on 14% of their red zone trips. That's easily the lowest in the league. It's 11 percentage points below the second worst team. The second worst team has scored on 25% of their red zone trips, a touchdown. So, that's going to come way up. I would guess it comes even up, into the middle of the pack league wide. So the offense has moved the ball better than that their points scored would tell you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if they had not fumbled twice at the goal line in week 1, certainly things would look different. I wonder though how much of that number is that. I mean, that should have been a game that they won pretty easily against Seattle, and they haven't looked any better overall since then. We've got 2 bad passing games from Russell Wilson since then. He's been well under 240 yards, I believe, in the past 2 games. He's now the guy that's going to pop every week in that Underdog Pick'em article when I'm comparing the numbers, and I don't even want to bet it until he actually does it.
Yeah, I mean, 5.6 yards per pass attempt for Wilson. I mean, and last week was a tough Niners pass defense. He has a much better matchup here against Vegas, but I would definitely try not to use Wilson even this week with all the crappy quarterback situations. I would use Trevor Lawrence over him. I would use Jared Goff over him pretty easily.
Yeah, I like Trevor Lawrence better than Russell Wilson, going forward right now. If you have to choose between them, I'd rather have Trevor Lawrence on a roster. Cortland Sutton is the easy start this week because he's the target leader the past 2 weeks. Jerry Jeudy's at least dealing with an injury, did play through it last week. Judy's sitting bottom of wide receiver 3 territory. There's certainly room for him to rebound if he's healthier, and especially if this offense does figure things out and get going.
Yeah, so Judy's off the injury report this week. So that's good news because it looks like he was limited in week 3 because he ran her out on just 75% of the pass plays. That was at 91% in week 1. So I would expect him to, get closer to that 90% mark this Sunday.
Mm-hmm. And then everybody else is there's not even really anybody else to talk about on that offense, right?
No, Albert O is pretty much droppable at this point. His route rate has declined every week so far, and he's just not doing anything.
The Denver offense, by the way, never would have guessed this heading into the season, but they're the 5th most friendly scoring matchup for team defenses right now, which they have no business being.
Russell Wilson takes sacks. He always has.
Yeah, but it's more about turnovers and lack of scoring points there. On the Raiders side, I'm not ready to play Mac Hollins if Hunter Renfrow is available, but I'm not dismissing him as a pickup in leagues that have like 20 roster spots or maybe 18.
Yeah, I mean, even with Renfrow healthy, Hollins was out there for pretty much every pass play. Now his target share spiked without Renfrow last week. Renfrow, by the way, didn't practice on Wednesday, so usually guys miss just the one game with a concussion, but it looks like there's at least a chance Renfrow doesn't play this Sunday. And if that's the case, I think, Hollins will move into wide receiver 4 territory at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I like him as a roster option, not somebody that I'm ready to start if the other guys are healthy at this point, but he's out there, as you mentioned, and he's been around the league a while at least. So, there's some veteran presence there. Anything else in that game?
I like Josh Jacobs as a buy low. Not a guy I liked at all in the summer, but his usage has been a little better than I expected. I mean, he's dominating Raiders carries. He has 80% of the Raiders carries. He has 42 total carries. That's 13th in the league. He hasn't scored a touchdown yet, where he's been a high-end touchdown scorer throughout his career, and I do think those will start to come. So pretty tough matchup for Jacobs against Denver, but I do think you can stick with him as like a low-end RB2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I'm certainly happy to have him where I have him. I don't know that he's going to be a difference maker, but he's certainly going to add some touchdowns. We'd like to see more targets on a regular basis, but he's at least getting usage where it's possible.
And he did get, what do you have? I think he had 6 targets last week, so that was good to see.
Yeah, I hope that continues. New England at Green Bay, Packers by 9.5, over under 40.5. We got Jacoby Myers limited Wednesday with the knee injury that cost him last week. Last week, he was no practice, limited Friday. So we'll see about him for this week. Devontae Parker balled out in that game, but now he's got no quarterback because Mac Jones is out with a high ankle sprain.
Yeah, and Parker is a fine pickup if you want to just see where it goes from here. But with Brian Hoyer under center and then with Myers potentially back, I'm not starting. I don't even want to start Myers this week. He's probably still not at 100%. And then it's Brian Hoyer, who I expect to be a disaster.
Yeah, Brian Hoyer is late stage Cooper Rush. He's 8 years older than Cooper Rush. His last start was week 4 of 2020, 15 of 24 passing at Kansas City for 130 yards, 0 touchdowns and a pick. He had 2 games the year before that where he saw basically starter level play, 168 and 3 touchdowns in relief in the 2019 loss at Pittsburgh. Then 204, 1 touchdown, 3 picks the following week against Miami, career 3.5% touchdown rate. So, Mac Jones is not a world beater, but you definitely downgrade the whole passing game with the dip from Jones to Hoyer.
Yeah, that's insulting to Cooper Rush to call Hoyer a late stage Cooper Rush. This is a good
deteriorated Cooper Rush.
That's better. It is a good matchup on the ground for New England. New England's actually first in Football Outsiders offensive rush DVOA, and the Packers are dead last in Football Outsiders run defense ranking. So, I mean, if they can keep the game close, and if Hoyer can at least keep him on schedule, I do think Harris and Stevenson can have some success on the ground.
Yeah, they should certainly be leaning on those guys. And Ramondre Stevenson's now played ahead of Damian Harris in 2 straight games.
Yeah, I mean, they're still basically splitting the rushing work. It's just, Stevenson is in the passing down role. He's taking over for Ty Montgomery there. So, he's going to play more snaps and he's probably going to have more touches because he's going to get more targets. But I do think the carries are going to stay pretty evenly split.
Yes, I certainly agree with that. On the Packers side, nothing but the RBs. I think you can roster Romeo Doubs for now. I'm not sure that he's a play yet. He's not inside my top 40 for this week.
Yeah, not quite. I think he's just outside our top 40. And to me, it's mostly because of the matchup. Again, we just saw the Pats shut down Rashad Bateman. It's still a tough pass defense, but very encouraged by what we've seen from Dobbs, especially last week, obviously stepping up in that big role. I would not be surprised if he outscores Allen Lazard the rest of the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't be at all surprised by that either. And it's similar for Robert Tonyan, where he's somebody you can roster. He's
Yep.
in that middle tight end 2 range, but not somebody that I'm ready to throw into a lineup if I can help it.
Yeah, not yet, but I do think he's a good stash. Tunion's route rate has climbed every week coming off last year's torn ACL. Then he saw 20% of the targets last week. Yeah, that was easily a season high.
Mm-hmm. Kansas City at Tampa Bay on Sunday night. Chiefs by 1.5 on the road, over under 45.5. Harrison Butker was back at practice, ankle injury on this kicker injury show. Andy Reid said that he did some things, wasn't sure that he was going to be ready for Sunday. So for me, that's no play Harrison Butker this week.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I guess the Chiefs did cut Matt Amendola though, and they haven't signed any other kicker. So
they signed Matthew Wright, I believe, to the practice squad.
Oh, they did. Okay, all right. So I guess Butker's iffy. Yeah, sure. Go with the healthier kicker. That's usually the way to go.
Yeah, I had somebody asked me. Somebody were co-managing a team said, "Should I pick up Harrison Butker?" I was like, "No, he barely came back to practice. I don't even know if he's playing." No, you don't jump on the kicker immediately. MVS was limited Wednesday with an abdominal thing. Mecole Hardman, no practice Wednesday with his heel issue. Last week, he was limited with the same thing. So we'll see if that's any change in his status. But, we're trying not to use Mecole Hardman anyway.
The Chiefs got to start working in Sky Moore and even Justin Watson because MVS and Hardman just aren't getting it done. They're not drawing targets. They're not being efficient when they do draw targets. And I get it. They paid MVS all that money. They're probably not going to scale back his snaps, but I think they should.
All right, so go ahead and tell me how Juju Smith-Schuster is getting it done.
Well, he leads the wide receivers in targets, 17% target share. And he's been efficient. He's 30th in yards per route run among 79 qualifiers versus, MVS down at 66 and Mecole Hardman down at 68. So, Juju's not going to dominate targets, but I do think he's the best bet for targets. And, he's still playing with Mahomes. So I think he's a wide receiver 3.
I will give you all of that. CEH, we talked about earlier. I think in most cases, you kind of have to start him depending on what else you have at running back, but certainly not to the degree you would expect for somebody who's sitting 4th among running backs in PPR points right now. And that's why you should sell the hell out of him. Like, go act like you have a property that you need to get rid of because it's keeping your family from spending money on anything else. You've got to hit the streets and find a buyer for this one. The usage has been absolutely terrible for sustaining any production, and that included trailing Jerick McKinnon last week in playing time.
Yeah, it's crazy. He's, like you said, 4th in PPR points, despite playing 40% of the Chiefs snaps through 2 games, 36% of the pass routes. I mean, he's going to have a game soon where he has 45 total yards and no touchdown, and that's probably going to be the end of your sell window for CEH. And it could definitely be this game because the Bucs, remain tough against running backs. They're 5th in adjusted points allowed to running backs. So I would try to sell Edwards-Helaire before this game on Sunday night.
Yes, for sure. On the Bucs side, Tom Brady was a full practice Wednesday despite the injured finger on his right hand. Chris Godwin was back at practice for a limited workout for the first time since starting his hamstring in week 1. Julio Jones put in a limited practice with a knee. It's always noteworthy if Julio is practicing on a Wednesday. And then Russell Gage was limited with the hamstring, but he's been playing through that.
Gage, what a hero, man. I started him in main event last week, and he's just hobbling around out there, but somehow catching a bunch of these 6-yard passes. That was nice to see. Help me to a win. Brady's been a disaster so far in fantasy. He's finished quarterback 27, quarterback 25, quarterback 19. So he's hurt you all 3 weeks. But as he starts to get these wide receivers healthy, I do think he'll be better. This could be a higher scoring game. He's not inside our top 12, but I feel a bit better about him this week than I did last week with these wide receivers coming back.
Certainly anytime you have Mike Evans back on the field, it's better than when you don't have Mike Evans.
Yes.
Anything else from that game?
Buy Leonard Fournette too, because he's just way underachieving his usage. And it's just because the offense has just been so bad. So if the offense improves, Fournette's fantasy production will too.
The one thing I would throw in there, though, is if he keeps getting the number of carries that he's getting, he's going to go down at some point soon. I mean, we had him high in the injury risk heading into the season, and that's without assuming he's going to run the ball 24 times a week. So, be wary of that. I wouldn't, that would maybe That might maybe limit how much I'd be willing to pay to get him. I agree on the buy case for him, but I would be scared a little bit of that injury factor.
Well, I bet Rachaad White is being dropped in a bunch of leagues too. So I think people that drafted him thought he was going to have, this standalone value, and he hasn't so far. So trade for Fournette and go pick up Rachaad White, and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, if you can secure both of those guys, I feel much better about it for sure. All right, LA Rams at San Francisco on Monday night. 49ers by 1.5 in this game, over under 42. On the Rams side, Van Jefferson landed on IR ahead of last Sunday's game. So that means he missed that one and then at least 3 more. It also means the knee recovery is clearly not going nearly as well as they thought it was following his, was it June surgery or July or whatever it was. So he's not going to be there. So we can expect the target distribution to go in the way that it has to this point. Maybe the biggest beneficiary so far has been Tyler Higbee, who's still sitting 5th among tight ends in expected fantasy points. He's 7th in actual PPR points without even scoring a touchdown.
Yeah, I expect the usage to remain, maybe not quite at this level, but near it. This is a tough matchup for Higbee. The Niners first in adjusted points allowed to tight ends, second in Football Outsiders tight end coverage rankings. They were also good against tight ends last year. And Higbee scored 3 touchdowns in his 2 games against the Niners because, Higbee just doesn't make sense no matter what he does. So he's a bit lower in our rankings this week than he has, than like he was last week because of the matchup. He's still a top 10 tight end play.
Yeah, Tyler Higbee. The next guy in the rankings without a touchdown at tight end is Kyle Pitts at 14th, by the way. Matthew Stafford, 21st among QBs in fantasy points so far. He's 17th in expected fantasy points. So he's scoring under expectation, but that 17th also points to him not like sitting on this untapped well of points.
Yeah, the Rams have slowed down and gone run heavier this season. They're 27th in neutral pace and 22nd in neutral pass rate. So that's definitely hurting Matt Stafford. I think, his weaponry is hurting him with Allen Robinson not doing much, and he's having to throw way too many passes to Ben Skowronek. And again, tough matchup for the Rams passing game here. Stafford averaged just 6.6 yards per attempt in his 2 games against the Niners last season. So, just another guy where, a lot of weeks he's a lower end quarterback one, but I would not want to use Stafford this week.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's clear that Sean McVay, despite what week 1 seemed to suggest, does actually love Cam Akers.
I guess. So here's how this backfield shook out last week. It was 4 carries and 1 target for Darrell Henderson in the first half to just 2 carries and no targets for Cam Akers. Then Cam Akers, all 10 carries in the second half. Darrell Henderson did not get 1. And then, though, Cam Akers fumbles on his final carry of the game. So, we'll see what that means for the split going forward. Once again, I have no idea how to project this backfield.
It's definitely not one I want to be invested in, but if you're deciding between them for some strange, demented reason, then it's Cam Akers over Darrell Henderson now, just by the way we've seen them both get used the past 2 weeks. Henderson's been on the field more for the passing stuff, but it hasn't translated to targets. So it's not something I'm going to bet on for projection purposes.
Yep, I agree. It's Akers between the two if you have to pick.
On the 49ers side, left tackle Trent Williams is out 4 to 6 weeks with a high ankle sprain, which is not good news for the offense. The offense itself stunk versus Denver. So, part of that was probably the matchup. We'd like to see things get better, though. The Rams this week, not really a get-right spot. They've been solidly negative as a scoring matchup for quarterbacks, for running backs, and for tight ends. Mildly positive for wide receivers, but not to the point where I would say, play your receivers here.
Well, you're playing Debo, right? And then Ayuk, I think, he's in wide receiver 3 range. He's still seeing a nice 23.5% target share so far. So if that keeps up, he's going to be usable. I do think Jeff Wilson is a pretty nice play here. The Rams have been tough against the run, but if Wilson's going to get, last week he got 12 of the 13 running back carries. Again, I don't think they trust Jordan Mason. I don't think they want to use him. Marlon Mack is washed up, so I do think Wilson's going to continue to dominate running back carries.
Yeah, he should have gotten more than 12 carries in that game last week just based on how game flow went. But as you mentioned, he got nearly all of the running back work. He's dominating usage. He did end up with 106 total yards on his 15 touches in that game, so he performed well in what he did get. So yeah, I think Jeff Wilson Jr. is probably a better play this week than he even seems like as you're looking at your options.
Yep, definitely.
Well, that's going to do it for this week unless you got anything else for that Niners offense.
No, I got to get lunch. I'm starving.
That's right. That'll do it for this week 4 preview edition of the podcast. Head over to draftsharks.com now. You can see exactly how we project all these guys and rank them against each other for the week. Check out the fantasy points allowed page. We now have that powered by this year's numbers with the first 3 weeks of stats to work from. You can also find the strength of schedule pages by position. So that just gives you an easier way of kind of ranking each position versus each other for that specific week, but also looking at the rest of the season. So check those out. And if you just can't answer that one last question as you're setting your lineup for the week, come find me in the Draft Sharks Discord. I'll help you out, at least by telling you that you need to go back and check your My Teams page for the answer, because it's already been answered there. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us.